Mesiano. We are going to record the meeting today, and on behalf of the UNESCO chair on here at the department, I'm glad to welcome you and our speakers who are here in person today. And actually, I don't want to steal many time for this this seminar, because I'm sure that it will be very interesting. And I just leave the floor to Kyra Grieco, who is a PhD student who is studying the mining and environmental conflicts, who will moderate the session today. So, please,
okay.
Kyra.
Okay, the seminar today we organized together with the UNESCO chair for this fourth meeting of ESIC. It's titled Mining and Environmental Conflicts, a Challenge for Development Cooperation. So why we decided to introduce this theme in this group of lessons of seminar, it's related that we think that it's central to understand and to be aware of the complexity that you face when you work in development in developing countries and on territories and with local community. The focus of today is in fact related to the social and environmental impact of mining industry and on the extractivist process that are developed in many areas of the planet. In particular, the focus will be in Peru, in Latin America, and in Peru. Kyra Grieco, Kyra and Flaviano will present us two case studies, one from Cajamarca in Peru, it's a mine of copper, gold and silver, and another from Cerro de Pasco, always in Peru, it's a multi-mineral mine. And so I will present briefly the two speakers of today, and then we will start and go ahead with both the presentations. So Kyra, it's for, I'm not sure that I will get it correct, the affiliation, but is S in Paris. And she's an anthropologist, and she specializes in large-scale mining activities in Latin America, and in particular with a particular focus and approach from political ecology and looking to gender equality and non-human at a local level, let's say. And instead, Flaviano, it's the president and director of Source International, an association from Italy based in Pisa, and they work with local community affected by harmful consequences of extractive industries. And so I will leave the stage to you and to your presentation. So Kyra, you can join first, and maybe we can work it out. Yes, I guess it's here. This one. Okay. Perfect. Okay. Share. Okay. And no. Yes. Okay. Okay. All right.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me today. I'm glad to speak to a different public from what I'm used to, and feel free to interrupt me while I'm speaking if you have some questions or curiosities that arise during the presentation. So as Kyra was saying, I'm a social anthropologist, so what I will be presenting today is very much around the social effects of mining activities, which are very controversial often for the environmental impacts. So that Flaviano will also be speaking of more later. Say as a social anthropologist, I conducted extensive ethnographic research in this mining region, Cajamarca, in the north of Peru, which I will show you. No, well, never mind. I can't remember now the order of the slides, but there's a map of Cajamarca coming. And what I would like to, let's say, as a social anthropologist, I focused on the way in which mining development changes social relations at a local level. Mainly I focused on ethnic and gender relations, but I'm not going to be speaking about that much today. The point is that social effects, I think, are often neglected when we are looking at mining, and that it is important to understand them as a way also to understand local forms of opposition and critique. So today what I will be presenting, and Kyra, you will tell me, you will keep the time, tell me halfway through? Yes? Yeah, okay. So I don't go over time, I tend to speak too much. I'll give you a brief, let's say, introduction on, a brief introduction on neoliberal extractivism in Peru. So what we call extractivism, and the way it plays out in the Peruvian country since, I don't know what she just did, but but I trust her. Then I will be speaking more specifically about the social effects of mining in this particular region in terms of land tenure, social inequalities, economic inequalities, and access to water. And then I will briefly conclude on local social mobilizations against mining and their repression by the Peruvian government during the 2000s and 2010s. So, okay, there we go. So what do we intend by extractivism? This term is often, we hear it more and more often in the last few years. It's become some sort of a keyword. So I think it's useful to define it using some Latin American authors who have looked to the sort of global spread of mining activities, in particular in the Latin American continent, since the 1990s. And they define it as a form of capitalist accumulation, which is based on an international division of labor between marginal territories of natural resource extraction and global centers of transformation and production. So this division of labor at the same time prolongs colonial relations between North and South, but also between indigenous and non-indigenous territories within the same state. So generally, regions of extraction are rural, marginal, inhabited by peasant or indigenous populations, and the wealth which is produced is largely concentrated in urban centers, which are inhabited by non-indigenous populations and are reinvested into the sort of third sector to services, okay? And what is very important is that to keep in mind also is that extractivism is not only an economic regime, but it is also an ideology. It is also a political discourse. And specifically, as of the 1990s, it has been in Latin America, in many countries, and Peru is particularly exemplificatory of that. It has supported developmentalist policies and ideologies. So the idea that in certain territories, which are rural, poor, marginal, inhabited by indigenous populations, the only thing that you can do is extract natural resources. And that is the only way to integrate these populations to the national community and through the market, right? By building infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. So there's very much a sort of differential discourse of development, which is sort of underlying this, okay? So first of all, the idea that local populations necessarily want to be integrated and integrated in this way to a national community and market. And I will speak more about this also sort of in terms of the criminalization of protests. So in the case of Peru, we have a very strong mining development starting in the early 1990s. Mining production has become progressively, I mean, this obviously changes from one year and decade to the other, but we are considering about how can I say, it hovers around the 50–60% of national exports is constituted by raw minerals. And mining has also become an object of growing social conflict as of the democratic transition of 2000, okay? So Peru was under a technocratic dictatorial regime from 1990 to 2000. In 2000, this regime ended. There was an opening, a democratization process, and this, to a certain extent, lifted the cover on social mobilizations too. And social mobilizations, social conflict concentrated around the growing mining activities. Okay, what you see here is a map of concessions in 2014, which touched a particular high. So we had about 20% of the country under mining concession, which does not mean that they were actually being exploited, but potentially being, explored and constructed for exploitation. And also about 50% of the social conflict in the country was connected to the environmental and social effects of mining activity. So this is what an open pit mine looks like. Of course, you are in a line of work where you probably have already seen these, but it's always useful to show an image. And in particular, this mine is Minera Yanacocha, so it is a gold and then copper and then silver and now becoming phosphorus mine, which was sort of opened the way to the mining development of the Cajamarca region. So it started production in 1993, and it was the biggest gold mine in Peru, and if I remember correctly, in Latin America from 1993 to 2013. Second gold production in the world in more or less in the same period. So it was very, let's say, economically and politically important in the region and at a national level. And do you know more or less how open pit mines work, or should I say a few words on that? Okay, all right. So open pit mines look very different from the imaginary that we have of mines, which are, tunnels and people who are pickaxing at rock to find veins of gold. Okay, open pit mines are a completely different affair. They are highly technified, mechanized activities in which, and the gold is present in very small particles in the soil. So the principle is that huge amounts of land are moved. They are put in sort of pyramids, and these pyramids are watered down with a water-based solution that contains various solvents, various acids such as sodium cyanide, which catch the particles, the metal particles, bring them down. They are then taken out, separated. The water is purified, ideally, and set back into the environment, and the metals are separated, processed, and removed. So it is a kind of activity that demands enormous land surfaces and a very strong and very important provision of water in closed circuit for the extraction process. So in the case of Minera Yanacocha, which you see now, the surface of the mine is more or less, now I usually do this for a French public, the surface of the mine is more or less that of Paris within the walls. So it is a quite large extension. And this, of course, implies a series of consequences for land, water use in the area for local populations, which I will come to in a moment. So the difference from mining activities, as there were many in Peru before the 1980s, basically up to the 1980s. So the difference with sort of traditional, what we think of as mining, which is tunnel mining, is there are various elements of difference which are relevant for then the impacts, both environmental and social, of this kind of mining. So firstly, as I was mentioning, it is a highly technified and mechanized activity, which means that there is a very limited and highly qualified workforce. people working in open pit mines are engineers, geologists, hydrogeologists, etc. This means that they are often in many of these sort of rural and poor regions, they are obviously non-local. Large part of the workforce comes from other regions of the country or of the world. So you have a lot of expats, for example. And there is relatively little local sort of skilled and unskilled labor. So this obviously has an implication for these socioeconomic impacts in the region, right? There's not a lot of work and there's not a lot of producing wealth amongst the local population. The other thing is this form of extraction by lixiviation or leaching is of course a high risk of environmental pollution, because any, let's say, mistake in the monitoring of acidity levels of the water, any minor, how can I say, I don't have a word, any minor mistake or break, for example, in the leach pad, in the tubes that are transporting the solution, et cetera, can mean that there are acid leaks into the ground, into the underground water, and therefore into the surrounding environment. Besides which, we are in semi-tropical climates, so we have rainy seasons and dry seasons, and of course, extreme rain episodes also tend to create sort of unmanageable situations. Last but not least, what I was mentioning, the extraction operation demands great surfaces of land and quantities of water. Therefore, there is a clear and immediate competition between extractive activities and other forms of local production, such as agriculture and cattle rearing, which is why I put you a picture of a lady with her sheep from a community near the Yanacocha operations. So a few words on extractivism as ideology at a sort of the way in which this plays out in Peru. It is not a specificity of Peru, but it plays out differently, of course, from one country to another, depending on sort of national history and political context. Now, as I said, Yanacocha starts its activities in 1993. And it is actually sort of the beginning of the Peruvian mining boom, which is also why this company is particularly iconic of the sort of a new, let's say, period in Peruvian history and economy. Why is this? This happens at the end of the 1980s decade. The 1980s decade in Peru are a decade of internal conflict between the Maoist guerrilla Sendero Luminoso, or Shining Path, and the army. And this internal war creates about more than 70,000 victims, particularly in the southern and central Andes. And it is a very bloody conflict which tears the country apart, and which sort of starts petering out at the early 1990s. In 1992, the leader maximo and founder of the Shining Path, Abimael Guzman, is captured. And we are also in this period of technocratic regime under Alberto Fujimori, the then president, elected, and then how can I say, he is elected and then he does what we call an autogolpe, so an auto coup d'etat, basically, and stays in power. And Fujimori in 1993, he does this autogolpe and he reforms the constitution. And when he reforms the constitution, he creates this orthodox neoliberal constitution, which facilitates the arrival of international investments in the mining sector and in general in natural resource activities. And so there is a very strong ideology in this moment which connects The return of foreign investment and tourism too. Tourists come back to the country, to Peru, after the whole sort of 1980s decade in which they are not there. And so the return of investments, mining ventures, and the pacification of the country. So mining equals development equals social peace. And this is a political discourse which has been maintained, Kyra, halfway? Yeah, okay, great. Which has been maintained by following governments. And it's a very strong underlying ideological heritage, which leads to the fact that social mobilizations against mining are often accused of being terrorist or harboring terrorists and being anti-development or being at the service of foreign countries, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a very strong sort of ideologization behind mining. Now, 1993 is also the beginning of the national and regional mining boom. And already in the early 1990s, there start being the first conflicts over the impacts of Yanacocha's activities on land and water. These lead, after the democratization of 2000, to great mobilizations, which we have in 2004 and 2011, against either the extension of mining activities or new projects in areas which are hydrogeologically sensitive, and therefore which are at high risk of water pollution. So this is the Cajamarca region, and let's say it is not what is important to keep in mind is that this region does not have any important historical mining activity before the 1990s, and within the early 2010s we have about 30 mega projects at different levels of sort of different stages of life, right, between exploration, exploitation, and closure. While there is during this period, while mining becomes 30% of the gross regional product, it only employs 3% of the economically active population, right? So this region remains a very strongly agricultural region, where agriculture is only 10% of the gross regional product, but it employs 44% of the economically active population. Formally economically active, we are probably looking at 70% if we include people who have multi-activities, which is often the case in these areas. So how does mining change social relations and sort of social networks at a local level? We have a series of paradigmatic phenomenon, such as urban growth, because there are the urban centers near mines tend to grow. Obviously, there is a lot of internal migration. So people who from the countryside will move to the cities because there is new demands for construction and production and commerce, etc. We have in this urban growth, there are new phenomenons of spatial segregation. So this is an extremely unequal economy in which we have sort of poor, sort of favela-like quarters and gated communities where the new mining elite will be living. There are, in general, rising socioeconomic inequalities and criminality. And especially what we see at the level of the regional capital of Cajamarca is, while the city grows, there also starts being a growing competition for services, such as water and sanitation. So all the new poor quarters will be built in areas that do not have running water or sanitation. And when they do, they have it for a very limited amount of time, especially in the dry season. Now, people who have enough money, for example, to buy a water tank, can put a tank on their roof, accumulate water during the hours of the day in which there is the water is running, and then have water all day. Whereas in the quarters in which this is not the case, you have water from 6 to 8 in the morning, if you are lucky, and maybe a few hours in the evening, and that is all. And of course, there are also growing concerns from the 1990s to the 2000s of water pollution. What you see is a sign there. It's not very visible, but it says "Don't drink, no beber." That's one of the private schools in Cajamarca, where the children of the mining community go, and where they are told not to drink the running water from the city. Now, what happens in rural areas? Because this is the city, but of course, in rural areas around the mine, there are also very important repercussions. Mines tend to be located in the higher part of the Cordillera, which used to be pasture lands for the local surrounding communities. So how can I say, when mines arrive, they tend to buy at very low prices great quantities of land for the exploitation, which drives up land prices all around. So people who've sold their land have a lot of problems buying land back in the same area. And also there starts being a lack of pasture for animals. Now, this is in part compensated by mining companies through social responsibility programs that give labor, unskilled labor, in particular to men, which leaves women generally doing the agricultural work, care work, in cases of land and water scarcity. So obviously the sort of gender inequality gap, socioeconomic inequality gap is rising. Moving on to the mobilizations. Of course, so all these phenomena create rising inequalities. They're not only, how can I say, they not only increase existing gender and ethnic inequalities, these are reconfigured. So for example, some peasants from peasant communities near the mine, one of the whole community, might actually have sold his land at a good price, have bought 4x4s, which he rents to the mine. So he's started his own business and has made tons of money, whereas the rest of his neighbors and family members have not. So there is what is how can I say, there's not only an increase in existing inequalities, but there's also a reconfiguration. These people are very discriminated, for example, in the urban city area, because all of a sudden they have a lot of money, but they do not have the education and the, let's say, social capital of the sort of mining middle classes. So there's a lot of sort of very quick social change. And this creates, alongside with lack of water and fear of water pollution, resentment and reasons for mobilization, which coalesce in two particular moments. So 2004, 2011, there, in both cases, we have very vast regional movements against, in 2004, an expansion of the existing Yanacocha mine to a particular mountain from which water serves the regional capital. So people from the regional capital start getting very worried when the mine starts saying we're going to exploit that particular mountain. Kilish project is the name of the mountain, because they see that as affecting directly their water reserves. And in 2011, the same company announces a new project in a hydrogeologically sensitive part of the Cordillera. And again, we have a major mobilization. Now, what it is worth mentioning is that in both cases, these mobilizations meet with severe repression, both physical and, yep, I'm getting to the end, so that's perfect. They meet with severe police repression. In 2004, activists are, how can I say, they receive threats and are followed and are filmed and are put on, how do you say, schedati? I don't have the word. Anyway, they are put on file. There are files that created on environmental activists. In 2011, which is the period I was doing field work, the then left-wing government of Ollanta Humala Tasso declares, who is an ex-military at the time, declares a state of emergency, and so the army is sent to Cajamarca. State of emergency means how can I say, there's a curfew, no assembly of more than 6 people, etc., right? So the suspension of basic civil rights, such as the right to protest. During this period, there are also some very violent clashes between the army and police forces, which at the time were acting together, and protesters. And in 2 days, 5 people are killed by supposedly rubber bullets. That's which we see in the picture. They're clearly rubber bullets. So to conclude, sorry for this maybe a little bit dark picture, but we can talk about it more in the discussion. I'm sure that Flaviano's presentation will, let's say, contribute a series of elements that I didn't go into. But let's say it is very difficult to separate the environmental and the social effects of mining, and so this is very much sort of a call to a more holistic understanding of social and environmental inequalities as being strictly intertwined, and the way in which changes in land tenure change social relations at a community level, change ethnic and gender relations, can increase inequalities in various ways. And also to understand extractivism, not only as an economic development strategy, but very much as a political ideology. And to a certain extent, colonial ideology. Now, to sort of end on a lighter note, the let's say social mobilizations in Peru since 2000 have been severely repressed and criminalized, but they have, however, managed to open a national debate on ways out of extractivism. In 2008, for example, was created the Ministry for the Environment. There was not a Ministry for Environment, and to a certain extent, this was a result of grassroots mobilizations. Now, of course, this is all very, how can I say, transitory, and the pandemic has unfortunately increased the pressure on natural resources. But there is, however, a growing dialogue, not only between social movements, local social movements in Peru, but at a sort of continent level and internationally, on how to envision other more sustainable forms of development in these territories. Thank you very much. I'll end there. I'll leave the floor to Flaviano.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me here, and thank you. Yes, okay. And thank you, Kyra, for your presentation that introduced a lot of the topics that I will cover now.
I don't want to head the cut from the screen.
Sorry, thank you. I did it on purpose, actually, not to be seen. Okay, first of all, I introduced the organization I'm working for, that actually I founded. It's called Source International. We are an international organization based in Italy, and we provide communities with access to scientific knowledge and expertise that they otherwise wouldn't have, and enabling them to stand up for their rights and claim justice and remedies. And we work all over the world, as you can see. Those are all our projects that we have done in the 10 years. They are roughly 26, they should be 26 at least, actually more than 40, sorry, 26 countries. And we have a main office in Italy, and we also have an office in the United States. As you can see, the majority of our projects are related to mining, but we also work on oil and gas and other extractives, like, for example, agro-commodities, sugarcane or huge plantation of palm oil and other things like that. But today I will speak by one specific case, which is in Peru. It's in Cerro de Pasco. It's slightly north from Cajamarca. I didn't put a map, but it's on the Andes, in basically the exact center of Peru. And this is the mine, which is this huge hole in the middle of a city that has 80,000 inhabitants, which is roughly half of Trento. I just checked. And also as a surface, it's actually bigger than the municipality of Trento. I also just checked. It's basically 2 kilometers long for 2 kilometers wide and 800 meters deep. So it's basically a mountain on the other side. You can see here from this picture how the houses are so close to the pit. This is something that is very peculiar of Cerro de Pasco, very different from other places, where basically the city has developed together with the mine. So it's actually different from Cajamarca, where the mine arrived in the 90s. This mine is actually is more than a century old as an open pit mine, but it's actually even older because of legends, or actually historical facts, says that even the Incas were mining in this area. And then the Spanish, when they arrived, so it's from the colonial area. So it's basically like 5 centuries of mining. And the city basically developed together with the mine, around the mine. And as every time that the mine grow a bit, chop a piece of the city, and the city grow more on the side, and then the mine chop another piece, and so on and so forth. And obviously, this has created a lot of tension, very similar to what Kyra just said before, and also obviously an incredible amount of pollution and health damages, which is what I will focus mostly in the presentation, but then I'm willing and able to answer any question that you have on other topics. What I didn't say is that this mountain that is chopped on the other side, basically, you have to imagine that if you are lucky, you have an ore that is 5 to 10 grams per ton. So every tons of rock, let's imagine you have 10 grams products, it means that you produce 990 kilograms of waste. And so it's not only the surface of the city of Trento, of Paris, like in Cajamarca, it's also the surface that is used to accumulate all this rubbish, basically. And in Cerro de Pasco, we arrive at some ridiculous level in which these mountains of rubbish are accumulated on top, basically, of the hospital. This is the public hospital of Cerro de Pasco, and you have this huge mountain of waste just on the side of the hospital. And also another place where they have accumulated these wastes over the years is a lake. This is the Kyula Lake. Kyula in Quechua, which is the indigenous language of the area, means the lake of the seagulls. Because believe it or not, there are seagulls in the Andes. There's a specific, the Andean seagull. It's a small seagull, actually pretty beautiful. And this lake is still called the lake of the seagull. Obviously, this is the water today, which is more acid than the acid we use in the batteries, because over a century, all the rocks has been accumulated inside the lake, because just they didn't have space. So they say, well, let's use the lake. And nowadays, obviously, there's no more seagull in the lake. And also related to what Kyra was saying, the fact that these areas are poor. Despite the fact that the mine, in this case, produce $60 million revenues every year, these areas are poor. So you have these persons who's called recicladores, recyclers, maybe in English, I'm not sure, that goes into the rubbish inside the mining waste to just collect what they can and just reselling on the market, and also bring their pigs there to eat whatever they can eat and then just sell this to the market too. And obviously conflict is everywhere, and it is a huge social conflict in Cerro de Pasco because of what we will see now. So because this is your engineer, so I normally tend to be way less technical, but today I prepared a bit of technical aspects about the mine and how it works, and especially how the pollution of the mine is generated and how it goes into the environment. Starting from water and soil, which is the main source of pollution, basically. This pipe is the pipe of the discharge pipe of the mine of Cerro de Pasco. The mine, as Kyra was saying, used an incredible amount of water. In the city of Cerro de Pasco, the water is available only on Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday from 8:10 to 8:30 in the morning. Okay, so you have basically 1 hour of water a week. Most of the people has the tank, but not everyone, and the poor people don't have the tank, and they just have to wake up early and fill their whatever they have and just keep going. But the mine uses an incredible amount of water, and the discharge water is this one. There is an ironic sign somewhere in the picture. It's small, like it should be over there. I can't see. Well, it's that, yeah, it's that green on the top there. There's a green sign that says neutral water of mine. This water is not neutral at all. It contains lead concentration 400 times over the limit. So this is not that river. This is the San Juan River, which is a big river. This is the point, the concentration of aluminium. This is the point before meets the pipe. This is just after. This is 20 kilometers after, and this is when it gets to the lake, which is 46 kilometers after. So you can see that the water is actually clean from the beginning, and then when it meets with the discharge of the mine, the concentration of heavy metals skyrocket, and then it takes 60 kilometers to not even get into the normal level, let's say. Remember, we are in the Andes, 4,400 meters on the sea level. So there's plenty of water, small streams that obviously dilute the water because there are glaciers over there that melt and dilute the water, and therefore it decreases, but it still decreases not enough 50 kilometers later than the ending on lake. And with lead is actually even more. As I mentioned, it's 400 times the limit. The limit is 0.1, and here we are at 4.4, so actually 440 times the limit. Another source of pollution is obviously the dust, because as you've seen those mountains of piles, they are called stockpiles. So those stockpiles, in winter, the water, in the rainy season, the water just trickles down and goes into the underground water. But in summer, when the dry season, there is the dust coming up from those mountains of waste. And if you see, there are some town, like the town of Parancha and Jose Carlos Mariátegui, those are those two towns. They are absolutely surrounded by these mountains of waste, these stockpiles. And therefore, they receive an incredible amount of dust, as you can see from this 3D analysis, which is not, this is not a model, it's a real one. We just put like samplers all over the places and collect dust in order to be able to create this map. So you can see those two towns are like, I forgot to bring some stick or something, but it's like over there on top there, and they receive all the dust when it's the dry season. And I put this because I was feeling that it would be funny with engineers about the difficulties of work in the field because you are in the university, and when you are at the university, everything is perfect. You are in a lab and everything works. When you are out in the fields, like nothing works, and everything creates problems. So especially, this is the machine that I said we use to collect the data of the dust. And we had a huge problem because these instruments are not calibrated to work, below 10 degrees. And Cerro de Pasco is 4,400 meters on the sea level, is never over 10 degrees. So we had this huge problem of how to make it work. And so we created this sort of cage. This is a cage for cats, you know, the things for bringing a cat. This is one of those things that you connect to the electricity and make you warm, if you're, you know, like for the belly or the back, which are bought from the ferramenta, like the hard workers, the hard workshop, I suppose. Yeah. Hard workshop in my village. And then there is alpaca wool all inside. And we managed to keep the temperature always over the 10 degrees and collect all the data. I just thought it would be funny for you to see this. And then obviously, all this pollution into the water, into the dust, into the environment in general, the soil, the food, things about those pigs that we have seen before, and alpacas that are around grazing and everything, has an effect on health. And this is a study that we published last year or maybe 2 years ago on scientific report by Nature, and where basically we work with doctors. We bring 3 doctors from Europe there, and we did a screening of people in Cerro de Pasco and Carhuamayo. Carhuamayo is a village that is 50 kilometers far away and has the same conditions, so same altitude, same temperature, same style of living, but there's no mine. And basically we discovered that in Cerro de Pasco, there is 15 times more likely to get nosebleed than in Carhuamayo, 12 times more likely to have white, you know, those white signs on nails that are typical from, yeah, I know everyone now start checking you. Those are basically absence of calcium, which it can be provoked if you have an intake of metals. So it's an indirect measurement. And then chronic colitis, dermatological effects, mood alteration. The first time we arrived in Cerro de Pasco, we discovered that the second cause of death in Cerro de Pasco among teenagers is suicide. And at the beginning, we thought that was just, you know, they live in a shitty place, honestly, it's ugly and bad and the weather is horrible. But then we realized that there's also an influence of some heavy metals like mercury and manganese and lead on your brain development and your mood alteration. So there's a lot of also infant depression. There is a reduced field of view, actually 4 times higher than in Carhuamayo. And yeah, this is just a picture on how we work with those doctors in this case. And this is just those are the statistical data, but there are some also like, anecdote that says a lot. The doctors arrived and they brought, the things for measure the pressure. It has several sizes. We work with children between 5 and 15, and they came from Spain with one of those pressure measurement equipment from 3 to 6. Okay, it didn't work. In Cerro de Pasco didn't work. They had to buy a neonatal one because the children were too small. Even if they were 5-year-old, the 3-year-old was too big for them. Basically, 80% of the kids, they have some sort of neuromuscular problems. We will see later what. 60% of the kids in Cerro de Pasco have depression, some sort of depression. And then all the kids of Cerro de Pasco had some story of bleeding nose. When we did the analysis in Carhuamayo, none of them had, except 1, sorry, that we then after that, we realized that actually was not from Carhuamayo, just moved in Carhuamayo, was born in Cerro de Pasco. Same from stomach problem and some sign of intoxication. And This correlates to very strictly to what there is the bioaccumulation of the heavy metals that are produced in the environment. So basically, when the mine operates, the mine extract minerals, in this case, the mine of Cerro de Pasco, depending on the moments of the price, basically, of the minerals, they extract some minerals or others. At the beginning, they were extracting gold and silver when the Spanish arrived. Then when the industrial mine developed, was copper, was in the 1910, 1920, where copper were very pricey. So they extract a lot of copper. During Cold War, where there is a lot of use of lead, they used to extract a lot of lead. Then lead was abandoned in the late 80s. And then now is silver and zinc and gold again and copper again recently in the last 2 years, because copper is again, the price is already high. So basically, just to make it short, let's say that you want to extract gold and silver. You extract gold and silver, but then you have a lot of other metals that with this chemical system, which is the lixiviation that you use. So you lixiviate the rock, you extract gold and silver, and there is a lot of residual that remains, because the same chemical system extracts also arsenic, which is very abundant in rocks. You probably know is one of the most abundant, together with aluminium. And you don't use those minerals. And if you don't treat the water, those minerals just goes in the environment. And then arsenic and aluminium and lead, they tend to bioaccumulate over the trophic chain up to humans. So the first study we did was on blood. And those are the results of 41 people that we studied in Cerro de Pasco, and the effect that blood concentration, according to WHO, has on the health of people. So no one has basically less than 30. There is one that has 29 basically, but no one has less than 30. And you can see that already there are a lot of problems when you have 30 deciliter per liter. And a lot of them is way over 50, which is, create colic, anemia, encephalopathy, and Saturnism, and other type of problems. Moreover, in Cerro de Pasco, there's not only lead. There is a lot of other minerals, and lead, arsenic, there are some kids. Those are all children. Sorry, I forgot to mention, they're all children. There are some kids that has up to 17 metals over the limit. 17 heavy metals over the limit in their hair, in their blood or in their hair. After the pandemic, obviously, it was already a problem before, but after the pandemic, it was even more complicated to do analysis on blood. So we moved to hair. So now we tend to analyze the hair, so the accumulation of the hair, which probably it accumulates, used also to see if the drug test, for example, because it accumulates everything that is in your body. It's actually even more accurate than blood, because blood, it says how much, let's say, lead I have today. You take blood, and that's what, not even today, but this specific moment. If you drink 3 liters of water before taking your blood, your level of lead is probably a little less. Or whatever, but hair is an accumulation over time, and actually you can even, on long hair, you can even see the tip of the hair. It can be even 3 or 4 years before, and then you can see all the over time. So now we tend to analyze more hair, and we analyzed 17 metals in hair, of which, as I said, some kids have all of 17 over the limit. And those are just some data that you can see how much accumulation there is in. So, for example, on lead, it's 43 times over the limit that is, let's say, used by WHO, and 6 times over what is Cajamarca, the village on the 50 kilometers far away. Aluminium, mercury, and iron and manganese, for example, are way over the limit. And these are just a graph that show you the limit, how much is Cerro de Pasco, and how much is Cajamarca, which is the control group. So you can see there is a huge accumulation of heavy metals in their bodies of the kids in Cerro de Pasco. What are the effects of those heavy metals? Lead gives mental retard, behavioral change, QI reduction, and a lot of attention disorder. People cannot focus. Cadmium, the learning difficulties, memories alteration. Manganese as a coordination problem. This is a typical things that kids or any person which is affected by manganese cannot do. You can try. If you cannot do this, there might be that you are affected by some sort of manganese pollution, which I hope not in Trento. But and arsenic that also gives hyperactivity and alternation of mood again, which also create, if you notice here, it creates a bit of a problem to analyze the real effect, because they have so many different sources of pollution, and some of them give completely different results. For example, lead tend to make you depressed. Arsenic tend to make you hyperactive. So it's actually super difficult to study. And also there is no literature on this, because the literature is normally done in a specific case where you have one specific population with one specific heavy metal with one specific time frame. Here is a long-term accumulation of several sources of pollution, several heavy metals. So it's so complicated. And also complicated to trace because it's so old and so diffuse and so everywhere. But there is one thing that associates a lot of those, which is the reduction of the brain development. So we thought about this, was very difficult to came across it and manage to do it, but we ended up doing a screening of the IQ, so the intelligence quotient of the population of Cerro de Pasco. And also always compare with Cajamarca, the community on the other side. And this is the last study we did. And what it came out is that basically the average IQ of children of Parancha or Cerro de Pasco is 12 points lower than Cajamarca, which is also 12 points lower than the average, because Cajamarca is pretty much the same of the national average. Cerro de Pasco is 12 points lower. Now, the difference of 12 points of IQ is the difference between becoming an engineer and struggling to finish secondary school. 94% of the children in Cajamarca has a normal IQ or high IQ, and only 6% has a lower IQ, but in Cerro de Pasco, 40% has lower or very low IQ. And you can see here the difference, especially on the muy bajo, which is very low, how many children has very low IQ in Cerro de Pasco compared to Cajamarca. And we also put in relation the concentration of lead in their hair or other heavy metals and their IQ. And you can see that there is a linear correlation between the presence of lead in their body and their IQ. This graph speaks for itself. There is an 11% correlation between lead and the lower IQ, which goes together with 6% of arsenic, of cadmium, 5% of arsenic, 4% manganese, and 4% antimony. So basically, there is a clear linear correlation between the presence of heavy metals and their IQ. But there is one factor that is the highest of all, that influenced the IQ of children, and it is the level of education of the parents. Which it means that these children that has a lower IQ now, they will probably not get to a high level of education, and therefore even the next generation will be affected. Even if we stop the pollution today, even if we restore Cerro de Pasco like this in 5 minutes, there will be still an affectation to the next generation at least, and probably somehow even to the next one. Also, another thing to consider is that the development of the brain, you probably know, is in the first 5 or 6 years. After 7.5 years, basically the brain doesn't develop anymore. So when we see those kids with lower IQ, they cannot recover it, and therefore the next generation, as I said, and go on. Now, 5 minutes left, but I will finish because I want also to tell you what we do, except to collect all this data, which is something that we do, obviously, but also like what we do with this data, because that's what differentiates us from a research institute. We do use this data together with the local population in order to get access to remedies and compensation for the communities. And I want to share you a couple of good news that just the recent one. After I spoke to the Congress of Peru like 6 months ago, something like that, there was created a commission for the restoration of the environment in Cerro de Pasco, and last month, actually on the 13th of May, was approved the cleaning plan of the Rio Ragra, which is the river most affected, the one where the pipe is affected. So just to finish with a positive note at the end of this disaster situation I just described. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks a lot. I wanted to unmute and I don't know.
I guess we have to speak here.
Right.
No, this is closed. I know.
The
Computer. Okay, so thank you a lot. I mean, the presentation were both really intense for me. And what was most interesting thing that for me came out is that you have two completely different ways of producing knowledge. So, and you said it even comprehensive and holistic perspective, and instead this view related to data provider, no? And for me it's really interesting to see these two, and even I guess for like engineers or who comes from this kind of formation, that there are different ways of producing knowledge to understand places, and that they actually arrive to similar points or the same points, no? And so the development of this concept of extractivism that you evidence so in such an interesting way. Another thing that I think came out from both your presentation, it's interesting for me to reflect on if we then want to pass to the question phase, actually was related to this extractivism has a political ideology, no? You said, and it was interesting, but even because in somehow what Flaviano said is that it produced some social and environmental really heavy impact. And so the necessity is about a political shift, no? To produce a change on the territory and to develop better strategies and to limit pollution and to have healthy places, no? That are another cause, one other of the causes what I was thinking while you were speaking about all these healthy problems. What's really, all these healthy problems are a problem per se, but are even another producer of inequalities, no? On the territory. And so it's really, I mean, really heavy. Again, how you show and you propose the data were really clear. I mean, and perfect. What I mean, if there are questions and you want to have some, otherwise I can provide a question.
I have just a question. If you investigate something also, you are also in Italy. So on this study, of course, and in Thailand for places like this, because I remember that.
Okay.
Repeat. Yeah. She asked if we work in Italy in places like Taranto or something like this. We never worked in Taranto. I personally worked in Taranto 12 years ago, so at the very beginning. But Source International never worked in Taranto, but we have been working in some cases in Italy, like in Basilicata, a lot with the extraction of oil.
Yes, because you work for extraction.
No, just because it didn't happen. Just for that, not that we don't want to work. We work mostly in extractive, which, as Kyra and Chiara explained, is slightly different. But we work in Basilicata, for example. We work in the Apuan Alps. We now work in the Amiata, Monte Amiata region, the south of Italy, with the radon exposure. We have been working in Valtellina with an abandoned factory. So we have been working a bit in Italy, but yeah, it depends definitely. We have to say that despite we as Italian, we tend always to minimize our country. There is a system that somehow works in Italy. So even in the places, there is always, you know, a system that somehow makes the analysis. There are some university or often involved, or the ARPA. So our role is a bit less needed, although it is needed in some case, and that's why we work.
And usually it provides funds to
Who provides funds for us? You. Your 5 per 1000. Mostly is private foundations, and mostly from the US. But we also have some EU funded projects. And we have been working in partnership with some organizations like the United Nations or some other big NGOs that have provided funds also for some specific project. And it's a mix.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. And I have 2 questions. When you show your locations where you have where you've been working, I think one of them probably could be my country because it has to do with oil. I'm from Nigeria. One of the questions is what are some of the examples of successful initiatives that you've done to address these mining related conflicts and to promote environmental sustainability? And what are the lessons you've learned? Or are there any lessons you've learned? Can you share the experiences with us? And also, how have you been able to mitigate? We've seen places where the mining companies and also probably the government has benefited from, I'll call it the suppression, because in some part of my country, we've seen places where my country is rich in oil production, and we've seen high environmental pollutions where the people get to suffer and no development is brought to those communities, which is a major thing. And most of the developments are probably done in the city. And the conflicts that have risen from this mining, somehow the political class have benefited from it, and also the mining companies have been benefited from it. So the main question there is, how can we eradicate this justification to the menace currently is there, and what are the successful initiatives you've had? Can you share them with us and the lessons you've learned?
This is a $1 million question. Well, first, try to make it short. Well, your country is one of the examples, like the concrete example of a country which is very rich in natural resources, oil in this case, and which is one of the poorest in the world, and also one of the most polluted. I mean, the Niger Delta is considered one of the most polluted places on Earth, and the population of the Niger Delta is among the poorest. I mean, there's is basically the clear example of how to not do development in a country, on which we are a lot responsible, because Eni is one of the major actors in Nigeria, which is ours, because it's owned by the state, so it's owned by all of us. but we have zero control over any. So I tried to merge the two answers. Our idea is that if we make that every company and every government that pollutes had to pay, then on the long term, there will be a shift on the way extractive is done, or at least mining and oil is done. We have to make it non-sustainable from an economic point of view. At this moment, it's very sustainable. There is a paper that has been published a few days ago that demonstrate how the company that violate more human rights are the ones that share more profits. So until it goes like this, there's no solution. So our idea is that if we make it, costly for them every time, then we might change a bit. And this goes to the first question you made, some positive case. For example, in Mexico, we had a case where we made a company, the mining company called, one of the biggest actually, Goldcorp, had to pay $50 million in compensation for the communities. Now, it's obviously a huge company, but $50 million is still $50 million. Or there is another case in Papua New Guinea, the Frogera mine, where Barrick, another huge company, lost an investment of $5 billion. On this specific case of Cerro de Pasco, we managed to work with the Norwegian pension fund who divest $1 billion from the owner of the mine, which is Glencore, a Swiss company, which is the biggest company on the biggest commodity company on earth, Glencore, but $1 billion is a lot also for them. So if we manage to create a lot of cases in which every time you violate human rights, you have to pay a lot of money, because the money is the only language they speak. That's the only thing they understand. Make them pay. Then on the long run, maybe, hopefully, something will change.
One more question, please, before you said about the fines, because I feel if these fines are paid and the community don't feel the effect of these fines, then the fines are of no use. So how are there strategies in place now or probably in the later future where the communities can directly benefit from these fines, not this fines going to maybe one person or two persons in the community and it's embezzled? How can the community strategically benefit from these fines?
Okay, no, yeah, that's my fault. I was trying to be short. In the case of Mexico, it was not 50 million fine, it was a 50 million agreement with the community. So the company has to pay 10 million a year for 5 years to the community, but not in money, because we didn't want the community to get 10 million, what they do with 10 million. But basically, the company was forced to build a school, to give 90 different scholarships for students of the community to get study in the city, to build a new hospital, to build a water treatment plant, and a lot of soccer field, because the community wanted a soccer field, the patronal feast, because the community wanted that. So a lot of, it was an agreement, I make it short, but it was, because you're completely correct. I mean, the company in Cerro de Pasco paid a fine a month, basically, from UEFA, from the government of Peru. Everybody knows that there is pollution. The government of Peru, every once in a while, go up, take a sample, and obviously it's over the limit and make a fine. But it's like $20,000, $30,000 fine for the biggest company on earth. So obviously, I mean, and the community doesn't see a single cent of that fine, obviously. There are plenty.
No, because this work it's like, but they didn't share profit. They just share like they fixed an amount of money to give to the society without sharing the profit. So
no, actually no. Sorry, I make it. I keep keeping short. No, the story is even more complex. They bought the land without having the right to buy the land. So at the end of the negotiation was that they had to pay a fixed amount depending on how much they produce. So basically, it was a sharing of a part of the sharing of the profit with the community.
But the local community will decide, like the creation have power in governance of the company.
That will never happen.
The fact that they are sorry. That there was and just I'm just thinking like yes they give some sort of a share or fine to the community and the community receive it, but the fact that if they don't stop increasing the production still there will be a conflict, there will still be a problem. It's not just a matter of paying fines, but I think it's a matter of establishing limits to the operation that is much more sustainable, perhaps in a longer way. But of course, that establishment is really very, very difficult to put in place because if the government of that territory is not really very strong enough to say we need to have a limit of this thing, then I think
Yeah. No, and it's also, now of course every country is different. So you know the legislation in Mexico is not necessarily the same in Peru, etc. But one of the problems, for example, in Peru is that the governance of the mining sector is national, and so local and regional governments have no power. For example, once the concession is given, you can say, for example, that area is geologically sensitive. It is dangerous to mine there. We want to make it a protected area, but the local government cannot overrule the national government. Local governments only have control over small-scale artisanal mining, which is, of course, a whole other social sector too. So there's a, but I mean, those are also, I think that the point you were making was good. The presentation of your work in the Congress and what it leads is that also there are institutional mechanisms that can be, to a certain extent, I mean, think of, on one hand, there's mining companies, and you know, money is the only language they understand, and then on the other hand, there is reinforcing institutions and trying to work within national and regional, for example, environmental regulations, which have become more stringent over the last decades, but there's so much, like, I mean, they started from nothing. And, you know,
and also, I mean, the real weak point is the enforcement of the law more than the environmental regulation, because a country that we have been working quite extensively, for example, is Liberia. Liberia just basically copy-paste the environmental law from the United States. So it's pretty good. But the water authority of Liberia, they don't even have a pH meter, which is something that normally people with a pool has, because you know you need to measure the pH of the pool, you know, if you can bath. It's something that costs 50 euro. So how can you enforce the law if you don't have the instrument and the power to do that? So you have to make the laws, you have to make the rule. Also here, there is a law now for the restoration of your agra, but then you have to apply it, which is another step.
Okay, I guess we have like three questions left. The first one is from Matteo, for sure. No worries. And so if we have others, but let's go through them. Matteo.
Thank you for both of your presentation. They're really interesting. I have just a curiosity from your case study. Who is that manages that mine? Maybe I missed it. Who is the entity that manages?
Now?
Yeah.
Okay, I do it a bit longer, otherwise then it's like before. Used to be, so the mine was, the story goes back the Spanish, and then the industrial mine was started by an American corporation called Cerro de Pasco Copper Corporation. Then in the 60s, there was a nationalist government in Peru that nationalized the mine, and so became Centromin Peru, a national company. Then Fujimori privatized it again and sold it to a company called Volcan, which was created 2 weeks before by the brother-in-law of Vladimiro Montesinos, who was the head of security of Fujimori. So then Volcan was sued 20,000 times, and when they were really in the corner in 2008, if I remember well, they were in the corner, they had to, face a lot of cases. They sell to Cerro SAC. Cerro SAC is an entity created that day, owned 99.9% by Volcan and 0.1% by Buenaventura, which is also in Cajamarca. We just keep 0.1. Then Volcan was bought. Volcan in the time developed 5 different mines and a harbor. The new harbor of Peru was built by Volcan. Nobody knew that until the Panama paper came out, because it was a shell company. So when the Panama paper came out, and everybody realized that Volcan was building also the harbor and was owning the harbor, and that harbor is super strategic because it's a brand new harbor in front of China, where you can export all your minerals. So Glencore, the biggest commodity trader of the world, just bought Volcan, like the majority of the shares of Volcan. Okay. So now it's Glencore, but Glencore, what they have done in 2 years is breaking in pieces the properties of Volcan, and all the properties now that are in Cerro de Pasco are on sale. It's very cheap. You can get it for 30 million, you get the entire mine and all the products. It's really, they are selling for nothing. The mine used to produce $60 million revenues a year. Now it's on sale for 30 million. But nobody obviously wants to buy it, because you buy a huge legacy, environmental and social legacy. So that's
so maybe in this perspective, my question doesn't make sense. But anyway, I wanted to ask both of you if there is, in your opinion, lack of interest in at an international level in pollution due to the mining sector. Maybe it's more shifted on carbon emissions. So we have seen like the Kyoto Protocol with all the limitation of the case, of course, but if maybe with an international eye on this issue, on these troubles, could change something.
Well, I think that at the moment, actually, maybe 10 years ago was a good moment, but now not at all, because now with the green energy and the green revolution and how you call the new Green Deal, minerals has become more important than oil, basically. I mean, in the future. Yeah. At the moment, not yet, but in 30 years, lithium will be more important. Lithium, cobalt, and nickel, and all these strategic minerals, they will be more important than oil. So at this moment, I see very difficult that it will be something like that at the international level.
No, I agree. I think, I mean, it of course depends always where you're coming from. Working on mining and mining conflicts, I feel like there's a lot of international attention to the effects, but this is of course a very sort of, narrow sort of tunnel vision on the topic. And yes, I agree. I feel like the sort of, that's what is really, that's, can I say, a debate on extractivism, to my mind, is what is lacking a lot in the thinking and talking about environmental transition. There's some estimates on mineral extraction from now to the next 20 years in the context of the actual, that we need to extract 5 times what is being extracted today, which is already huge. So, I mean, we're talking about a sort of, global mine in order to maintain this plan. So I think it's definitely something, but I don't know. Yes. I don't feel like it's something that is not debated, but it's definitely, there's sort of like the debates are sort of parallel, and the connection is missing.
It's also hard to make people connected to a mine.
Mm.
You know, it's much easier to say, for example, I don't know, forest or yeah, ocean, whales. You know, it's the mine also like on the product, because you know, textile, for example, you can have a company, you know, Patagonia is really good, Nike is bad, you know, and then you can create some sort of conscience on the people. In the mining, I mean, it's so detached from us that it's difficult to relate to.
Yeah, you neither don't know where the product goes.
Yeah,
actually,
exactly.
no?
That's
So
part of it. Yeah.
because you were speaking about the case of Aponabs, and you don't know that Aponabs are not in your toothpaste or in your cream for your face, no? Because this is then the reality of where raw material goes, and you say, oh, what weird, no? And in some sense, this question is interesting, that CO2 pollution, let's say CO2 issue, for me, it rised up like that much. On one hand, probably with on the back, the mining extraction system that pushes that kind of shift in green transition, of course, no, in some sense. And then it's even all around all of us, no, because it's about air. And so it's something that you recognize really like yours, part of you in some sense, no? Even for me, there is even this kind of imaginary that has a role. I mean, in
And to just tail end, but now that we are looking at lithium extraction projects all over Europe, maybe certain of these debates will come home also to people and will become more real in the moment. But what is interesting is that extractivist discourse are extremely adaptive. So mining companies that were exploring lithium deposits in Europe, one of the discourses is it's better to do it here where environmental regulations are more stringent than to go and do it sort of in somebody else's backyard. So, which is extremely problematic because we're just sort of, just not talking about the limitations of extraction, but just about where to do it and with what regulations.
Okay.
Yes, well, you already partially answered to my question in the debate. It was about the implementation of any environmental legislation and the dialogue and linkage among the and the question is it easy? Yeah, it's not. Are you able to suggest some winning case or some good result in working with the local authorities in implementing environmental monitoring nearby of the mines? And is it accepted by authorities and the community itself? Because in our experience, I think when we are in not in Italy, let's say, but also it's not always simple for us as university in this case to be able to create a common language and to define we are doing it for this purpose and this will help you maybe not today but maybe in 10 years. So what's your experience with that?
I only one good case, which is Mongolia. In Mongolia, we have been funded by the United Nations for doing a project in which we were supposed to train local authorities in 6 different countries in how to do monitoring of mining activities. 5 completely failed. Absolutely. Mongolia did not. So that was the only case in which I can say the authority of Mongolia actually was already well prepared and trained by us and developed their own system. They adapt our system, we create a manual and everything. Was a pretty big job. They create their own system, they adapt to their reality and it works. But all the others fail. Some failed, some miserably failed, like literally in a bad way. Like, I mean, for example, in Mozambique, it was a disaster. Absolutely, the local authority was basically absolutely corrupt, and then they didn't want to do any sort of monitoring. I mean, at the level of which they were not releasing the instruments. I mean, things like that. So yeah, that's the only case I know. I know several cases of communities who do that. So like citizen science, that's another thing. There's a lot of cases.
And you work also with citizen science in monitoring.
Yes, we do a lot.
Yeah. We need to go to the ending of this debate. Actually, I had a question, so I would like to ask you a question, a reflection.
You had a question?
We saw. You had a question?
No.
Dai, Livia ha detto 5 minuti, ma noi
No, because I think we had a question since quite a while.
no.
I don't know, like listening to all your stories of this, like kind of not caring, just being in the streets that were polluting the environment and was like killing kids and people and stuff with all the health problems related. And when you are taking works to make them pay, make them like put an eye on them. It's not over everything. And I was just wondering if you ever had some problem like with security of your members and yourself, which is
Wait, yes. Some problem. We had some problem in Guatemala, in Mexico, less in Peru, but in Guatemala I was exposed. In Mexico we received some threat. And in Peru and also in Argentina we received some threat, but like nothing particularly dangerous. It's very sad to say, but being an European organization with European citizens and European passports, we are way more protected than local activists. Unfortunately, local activists are the ones that are really exposed. And I mean, in some cases, there were also some of our partners that was being killed in Honduras and Mexico. So, yeah.
Because last conference that they had, there was this case of Iran and that like the partner had been kidnapped and released, I believe. But these things happen as you have been working with a lot of countries and a lot of big companies. There's just wondering.
Wanted to actually all the question then a little bit resound this idea, reflection question for you, that it's much related to no, we saw lots of paradigmatic examples of extractivism around the world. No, we saw Peru, 2 of them, but then we talk about Nigeria, Mozambique, and Mexico, and so on. What I would like to understand, to debate with you. Actually, it's a little bit late, but let's now have a suggestion at least. It's and this kind of repression, and it's as well included even in this idea is. Are there European Western countries? How is the relation between this huge concept that maybe we need to make ours in some sense of extractivism? How can we apply this concept that got born and was developed and terrorized even, in Latin America context and in other developing country contexts. So which are the similarities and the differences that come out from there? And even this concept is going ahead, being used much more by movements, activists, and so on in Western countries, started as well in Latin America. Is it fine for you, this kind of attitude that it's going on now in Western and European countries, for your, I mean, France, Italy, your experiences, and yes, so it's proper to use it in one sense, which are different and similarities, and how we can try to make it ours and to interiorize even that kind of even like perspective view of an analytical view of what happens in extractivist context.
Last question. I think the concept of extractivism has been adopted in European context over the last sort of 10 years, very much by the political ecology sort of school, post-paraísmo, and environmental movements, basically. And it has been often used, which is why I wanted to define it in the beginning. It has been used in a very wide sense, in the sense that as a sort of almost synonym of contemporary financial capitalist forms of accumulation of wealth. And so I think that to a certain extent, but I mean, this is my personal opinion and absolutely debatable. Personally, I think it's important to maintain the sort of material basis and origin, in the sense that I don't think it's the same thing to do data extraction. I think there's a form of capitalist accumulation there, but they're not the same material, environmental, social effects as extracting 14 different metals from a deep pit somewhere in the world. So I think that the sort of material dimension of extractive processes, I think it has something to contribute to the debate, especially because that is what we are going towards. The sort of north-south divide is being reconfigured at both economic and geopolitical levels. And so what we understand as North and South doesn't mean the same thing anymore. So it's no longer necessarily Canadian companies exploiting in Peru, but we have Chinese companies that are, China is the biggest investor in natural resource extraction in Latin America in this moment. And we are also having companies that are, looking at developing mines in Europe that have been working in the global South. So this is, I think there's definitely something to make connections there and to discuss. But I think the sort of original sense of extractivism and that very sort of material, physical dimension is what makes, for me, the strength of the concept.
Can I ask more thing? In the Philippines, and one of the communities we assisted for a different type of development because it has been destructed and destroyed by mining. It's an island territory, and we initiated the development of ecotourism so that a particular area will not be affected by mining, because almost the entirety of the island is being exploited. And the community has been assisted by a strong non-government organization. In your case studies, in your sites, if you've been doing your research and you're doing your work, are also are there non-government organizations who help the community to be more aware of this environmental distractions and help the community be encouraged and empowered to assert their rights? are there.
Yes, definitely, definitely. I mean, I would say that mining companies have sort of come accompanied by a series of other international actors, luckily, that have, you know, maybe not from day one, but that have facilitated, and that's sort of what my first question was too, in the sort of, how can I say, giving legitimacy to local perceptions of the environment, people saying the water has changed, it's not good anymore, my cattle is getting sick, and the mine company or the local, you know, regional authority is saying, oh, wow, it's fine, you know, there's no problem. So that there comes in the NGO that does independent testing, that confirms and validates and gives sort of, so that's the whole sort of citizen science concept. There are a lot of facilitators, luckily, and that's why I feel like there's a lot of international attention. Now, of course, there are never enough organizations, there's never enough funding for so many affected communities. So it's always a drop in the ocean. But yes, the cases that do arise, and there are, and communities have been extremely, because this is also all about sort of external help coming in, but communities have been extremely clever and creative also in creating meaningful alliances at both, you know, local and international levels, and sort of making themselves heard, organizing, mastering new technologies. I mean, during the last few years, the last decade in Peru, the accessibility of smartphones, for example, has made it a lot easier to document police violence and forms of repression. And so, you know, this has had a huge impact on local activists' practices. So, you know, there's a lot coming from the ground too.
Thank you
I think
a lot
we
to
need to go.
everybody else. Yeah, we need to go because we need to close the university again. And so thank you to everybody. And Lydia, I guess it's here to
Just to remind that the next event will be in the 31st of May, and we are going to talk about a nature-based solution. So if you're interested in, you are welcome to join, and have a good night. And thanks again for Flaviano and Kyra, and for their presentation, and to Chiara for managing everything, and Marta in the back. Thank you. Thank you.